Sister Catherine sat by the window of the old stone convent, watching the morning sun paint golden streaks across the courtyard. Her hands, now wrinkled and spotted with age, rested gently on her lap. Those hands had done so much over the years. They had scrubbed floors, tended to the sick, planted vegetables in the garden, and folded in prayer more times than she could count. But there was something else those hands had once done, something most people at St. Anne's Convent knew nothing about. 84 years old now, Sister Catherine had spent the last 62 years of her life behind these walls. She wasn't complaining. Far from it. This place had become her home, her sanctuary, and the other sisters had become her family. The routine of prayer, work, and service had shaped her days into something meaningful and peaceful. Yet sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn or late at night when everyone else was asleep, she would remember a different life, a life filled with music. Before she became Sister Catherine, she had been known simply as Catherine Miller. She grew up in a small town where her father worked at the local mill, and her mother took in sewing to help make ends meet. Money was always tight, but her parents somehow managed to scrape together enough to buy an old second-hand piano when she was 7 years old. Catherine could still remember the day it arrived, how excited she had been, how she had run her small fingers across the keys, producing a jumbled mess of sounds that made her mother laugh. Her talent showed itself quickly. Within months, she was playing simple melodies. Within a year, she was playing pieces that seemed far beyond her age. The local church organist, Mrs. Henderson, offered to teach her for free after hearing her play one Sunday. Mrs. Henderson saw something special in the young girl, a natural gift that couldn't be ignored. So Catherine learned. She practiced every day after school, sometimes for hours, losing herself completely in the music. By the time she was 16, Catherine had won 3 regional piano competitions. People in her town would talk about her, saying she was destined for great things. Concert halls, they whispered. Maybe even performing in the big cities. Her parents were proud but worried. They didn't have the money to send her to a fancy music school, and they wondered what kind of future a girl from their humble background could really have in that world. Then everything changed when Catherine turned 20. Her father fell ill with pneumonia. In those days, medical care was expensive and not always effective. He fought for 3 months before passing away, leaving her mother devastated and in debt. Catherine had to make choices. She worked 2 jobs to help her mother, and her piano practice time shrank to just a few stolen minutes each day. The competitions and recitals became distant memories. During this difficult time, Catherine found comfort in the local church. She would slip into the empty sanctuary during her lunch breaks, sitting in the back pew, praying for strength and guidance. The peace she felt there was different from the peace she felt when playing music. It was deeper somehow, more lasting. Father Murphy, the old priest, noticed her frequent visits and eventually sat down to talk with her. Their conversations became regular occurrences. Father Murphy never pushed, never preached. He simply listened as Catherine poured out her grief, her fears, her confusion about what to do with her life. One day he mentioned the convent up on the hill, how the sisters there lived lives of service and found joy in simplicity. Catherine was intrigued. She visited once, then twice, then began attending their evening prayers. The sisters welcomed her warmly. They didn't care about her piano talent or her competition wins. They saw her as a young woman seeking purpose and peace. Sister Margaret, who ran the convent kitchen, took a special liking to Catherine. She would tell stories about her own journey to religious life, about leaving behind a career as a schoolteacher to serve God in a different way. At 22, after 2 years of soul-searching, Catherine made her decision. She would join the convent. Her mother was surprised but supportive. She had seen the change in her daughter, how the heavy sadness had lifted and been replaced by a quiet certainty. On the day Catherine took her vows and became Sister Catherine, her mother attended the ceremony, tears streaming down her face. It was both a goodbye and a beginning. The convent had an old upright piano in the common room. When Sister Catherine first saw it, her heart had skipped a beat. Mother Superior at the time, a kind woman named Sister Teresa, noticed her reaction. She asked if Sister Catherine played. When Catherine admitted she did, Sister Teresa smiled and said she was welcome to play during her free time. For the first few years, Sister Catherine did play occasionally. She would sit at that piano during quiet afternoons, her fingers finding their way across the familiar keys, playing hymns mostly, sometimes classical pieces she remembered from her youth. The other sisters would sometimes stop to listen, complimenting her skill. But as time went on, Sister Catherine played less and less. It wasn't that anyone told her to stop. It was more complicated than that. She began to feel conflicted. Was playing the piano a form of vanity? Was she holding on to her old life instead of fully embracing her new one? She watched the other sisters, who seemed so content with their simple routines, and wondered if her attachment to music was keeping her from finding true peace in her vocation. So gradually, almost without realizing it, Sister Catherine stopped playing. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. The piano sat there in the common room, and she would walk past it every day, but she wouldn't sit down. Sometimes her fingers would twitch, muscle memory stirring when she heard a particular melody. Sometimes she would dream about playing, waking up with her hands moving as if pressing invisible keys. But when she was awake, she kept her distance. Decades passed. Sister Teresa eventually passed away, and new leadership came to the convent. Sister Catherine grew older. Her hair turned gray, then white. Her back developed a slight stoop. Her knees began to ache on cold mornings. The world outside the convent walls changed dramatically. Technology advanced, music evolved, but inside St. Anne's Convent, life remained largely the same. The piano aged too. Its wood faded. Some keys stuck occasionally, and dust gathered on its surface. Fewer and fewer people even remembered it was there. It had become just another piece of furniture, sitting quietly in the corner of the common room, holding on to its own silent memories. Sister Catherine had made peace with her choice, or so she told herself. She had found purpose in other things. She had cared for the sick, taught children their catechism, worked in the garden, and spent countless hours in prayer. Her life had meaning and value. She had helped people, served her community, and stayed faithful to her vows. But sometimes, late at night when the convent was silent and still, Sister Catherine would lie in her narrow bed and remember. She would remember the feeling of keys beneath her fingers, the way music could pour out of her hands and fill a room, the transcendent joy of a perfectly played phrase. And in those moments she would feel a small ache in her chest, a tiny hollow space that nothing else had quite managed to fill. She never spoke about these feelings. There was no point. She had made her choice 62 years ago, and it was too late to go back now. Her playing days were behind her. The music belonged to a younger Catherine, to a different life. This was her life now, and she was grateful for it, even with its sacrifices. The old piano sat in the common room, forgotten by most, cherished in secret by one. Neither Sister Catherine nor anyone else at the convent could have imagined what was about to happen, how everything was about to change, how the world was about to discover a gift that had been hidden for more than 6 decades. The announcement came during their morning gathering. All the sisters sat in the chapel as Mother Superior Beatrice stood at the front, a pleased smile on her face. She was a much younger woman than the previous Mother Superior, only in her early 50s, and she had taken over leadership of St. Anne's Convent 5 years earlier. She had a reputation for being efficient and practical, always looking for ways to improve and modernize their facilities. "I have wonderful news to share," Mother Beatrice began, her voice echoing slightly in the stone chamber. "Mr. Hartley, the businessman who has supported our food bank program, has generously offered to fund complete renovations of our common room. New flooring, fresh paint, better lighting, and comfortable seating. It's going to be beautiful," the sisters murmured appreciatively. The common room was indeed showing its age, with cracked tiles, peeling paint, and drafty windows. A renovation would be welcome. Sister Catherine listened quietly from her seat near the back. She was happy for the improvement, though a small worry had begun forming in the back of her mind. Over the next few days, Mother Beatrice consulted with contractors and designers. She had clear ideas about what she wanted. Modern, clean, functional. She talked about creating a space that would be better for their community meetings and gatherings. The sisters watched as she made sketches and took measurements, her enthusiasm infectious. Then came the day that Sister Catherine had been dreading. Mother Beatrice stood in the common room with a clipboard, looking around critically. Her eyes landed on the old upright piano sitting in the corner. She walked over to it, running her finger along its dusty surface and frowning at the dirt that came away on her fingertip. "This old thing," she said to Sister Margaret, who happened to be passing through. "It's taking up so much valuable space. I can't remember the last time anyone played it. We could fit 3 more comfortable chairs in this corner, maybe even a small bookshelf. I think it's time for it to go." Sister Margaret glanced at the piano, then at Sister Catherine, who had just entered the room carrying a basket of laundry. Sister Margaret knew, because she had been at the convent long enough to remember, that Sister Catherine used to play. But that was decades ago, and Sister Margaret wasn't sure if it was her place to say anything. Sister Catherine stood frozen in the doorway, her heart suddenly pounding. The piano was going to be removed? The thought hit her harder than she expected. For 60 years, that piano had been there, a silent companion, a reminder of who she once was. Even though she didn't play it anymore, knowing it was there had been a comfort. It was like having an old friend nearby, even if you didn't speak to them every day. She cleared her throat softly. "Mother Beatrice, if I may." Mother Beatrice turned, looking mildly surprised. Sister Catherine rarely spoke up during decisions about convent matters. She was known for being quiet and obedient, never causing any fuss. "Yes, Sister Catherine?" "The piano," Sister Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Perhaps we could keep it." "It doesn't take up that much space, really." Mother Beatrice looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and impatience. "Do you play, Sister Catherine?" "I've been here 5 years and I've never heard anyone touch that piano." "I used to," Sister Catherine admitted. "A long time ago, before I joined the order. I just thought maybe someone might want to learn someday. At your age, Sister, I would think your time is better spent in prayer and rest, not thinking about worldly pursuits like music," Mother Beatrice said, not unkindly but with a firmness that made it clear the discussion was over. "The piano takes up space we need. I've already arranged for it to be picked up next week and donated to the community center. They'll make good use of it." Sister Catherine felt her cheeks burn. She nodded quickly, not trusting herself to speak. She picked up her laundry basket and hurried out of the room, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. Mother Beatrice was right, of course. She was 84 years old. Why would she need a piano? It was foolish to feel this attached to an object, to a piece of furniture. She should be focused on spiritual matters, not earthly things. But that night, lying in her small bed, Sister Catherine couldn't stop the tears from coming. They slid silently down her weathered cheeks as she stared at the ceiling. She felt silly, crying over a piano at her age, yet the grief was real and sharp. It felt like losing the last connection to a part of herself she had buried long ago. The next few days were difficult. Every time Sister Catherine walked past the common room and saw the piano still sitting there, her chest tightened. She had never realized how often she glanced at it during her daily routines, how its presence had been woven into the fabric of her life at the convent. Now it was marked for removal, and she felt powerless to stop it. Some of the younger sisters had heard about Mother Beatrice's decision and supported it enthusiastically. Sister Anne, who was only 35 and had been at the convent for just 3 years, mentioned during lunch one day that the piano was such an old relic and that she was excited to see the common room modernized. Sister Claire agreed, adding that nobody had played it in years anyway, so what was the point of keeping it? Sister Catherine said nothing, just pushed her food around her plate. Sister Margaret, sitting beside her, gently patted her hand under the table. It was a small gesture, but Sister Catherine was grateful for it. At least someone understood. Sister Dorothy, one of the older sisters who had been at the convent for 40 years, approached Sister Catherine that evening in the garden. Sister Catherine was tending to the tomato plants, finding comfort in the simple work of caring for growing things. "I remember when you used to play," Sister Dorothy said quietly. "It was beautiful. I used to sit outside the common room sometimes just to listen." Sister Catherine looked up, surprised. "That was so long ago. I didn't think anyone remembered." "Of course I remember," Sister Dorothy said, settling herself on the nearby bench with a soft grunt. Her own knees weren't what they used to be. "You played hymns mostly, but sometimes other things. Classical pieces. I don't know music well enough to tell you what they were, but they were lovely." "Why did you stop?" Sister Catherine was quiet for a moment, her hands stilling among the tomato vines. "I thought it was the right thing to do. I thought I was supposed to let go of my old life completely. Music seemed like vanity maybe, or a distraction from what I should be focusing on." Did anyone tell you to stop? Sister Dorothy asked. No, Sister Catherine admitted. It was my own decision. Sister Dorothy nodded slowly. Sometimes we make sacrifices that nobody asked us to make. We think we're supposed to, but maybe God doesn't want us to cut off every part of who we are. Maybe our gifts are meant to be used, not buried. Sister Catherine felt fresh tears prick her eyes. It doesn't matter now. Mother Beatrice has made her decision. The piano will be gone by next week. Did you ask if you could play it again before it goes? Sister Dorothy asked gently. Sister Catherine shook her head. I couldn't. My hands are old now. I probably can't play anymore anyway. And Mother Beatrice already said I should focus on prayer, not worldly things. She's right. Is she, though? Sister Dorothy said, raising an eyebrow. Music can be prayer, too. David played the harp. The Psalms are songs. Churches have organs and choirs. I don't think God is offended by beauty. Sister Catherine didn't know what to say to that. She went back to her tomatoes, and Sister Dorothy eventually stood up and left. But her words lingered in Sister Catherine's mind. That night, unable to sleep, Sister Catherine found herself walking through the quiet corridors of the convent. Everyone else was asleep. Her feet, almost of their own accord, carried her to the common room. She stood in the doorway looking at the piano and the dim moonlight coming through the windows. She walked over to it slowly and sat down on the bench. It creaked slightly under her weight. She looked at the keys, yellowed with age, some slightly chipped. Her hands hovered over them, trembling slightly. She was afraid that she had forgotten how to play, afraid that 60 years of silence had erased everything she once knew, afraid that her aged fingers would no longer obey her. But she didn't press down. She couldn't bring herself to do it. What if the sound woke someone? What if Mother Beatrice heard and was angry? What if she tried to play and discovered that the gift was truly gone, that she had waited too long and lost it forever? Sister Catherine pulled her hands back and folded them in her lap. She sat there for a long time in the darkness, just looking at the keys, remembering. She remembered the feel of them, the weight of them, the way certain passages required power and others required the lightest touch. She remembered the sound of a perfectly struck chord, the way harmonies could layer and build into something that seemed almost divine. Finally, she stood up and walked back to her room. The piano would be gone soon, and with it would go the last physical reminder of the musician she had once been. She would have to accept that and move on. She had survived 62 years without playing. She would survive the rest of her life without the piano. But as she lay in her bed, Sister Catherine made a quiet promise to herself. Before they took it away, she would visit the piano one more time. She would sit at the bench, place her hands on the keys, and say a proper goodbye. It seemed like the least she could do for an old friend who had waited patiently in the corner all these years. Never complaining, never demanding attention, just being there when she might need it. She didn't know that saying goodbye to the piano would never happen. She didn't know that in just 3 days everything would change in a way she could never have imagined. The television crew arrived on a Tuesday morning. Sister Catherine was in the kitchen helping Sister Margaret prepare lunch when she heard the commotion in the courtyard. Vehicles were pulling up. People were unloading equipment, and Mother Beatrice was greeting them with her usual efficiency and warmth. "What's all this about?" Sister Catherine asked, peering through the kitchen window. Sister Margaret wiped her hands on her apron. "Oh, didn't you hear? Some documentary people are here. They're making a film about religious communities and charitable work. Mother Beatrice arranged it weeks ago. Said it would be good to show people the work we do with the food bank and the homeless shelter." Sister Catherine felt a flutter of anxiety. She had never been comfortable with cameras or attention. During her brief time in the spotlight as a young pianist, she had always preferred the music to the recognition. The idea of strangers filming them made her want to retreat to her room and stay there until they left. But of course, that wasn't an option. Everyone was expected to participate and present their best face for the visitors. So Sister Catherine helped Sister Margaret finish preparing the vegetables, trying to calm her nervous hands. The documentary crew consisted of 5 people. There was Philip, the director, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and an easy manner. His assistant, Joyce, carried a clipboard and seemed to know exactly what needed to happen at every moment. Then there were 2 camera operators and a sound technician whose name Sister Catherine didn't catch. They moved through the convent respectfully, asking permission before filming, being careful not to disrupt the sisters' routines. Throughout the morning, they filmed various aspects of convent life. They captured the sisters in prayer, working in the garden, preparing food for the local homeless shelter. Mother Beatrice was interviewed about the history of St. Anne's and their mission in the community. Several sisters were asked to share why they had chosen this life. Sister Catherine managed to stay in the background, keeping busy with tasks that took her away from wherever the cameras were. By early afternoon, the crew took a break. Joyce had brought sandwiches and drinks, which they set up in the common room. Mother Beatrice invited the crew to rest and refresh themselves. Some of the sisters joined them, curious about the filmmaking process and asking questions about how documentaries were made. Sister Catherine brought in a tray of teacups, planning to set them down and leave quickly. But as she entered the common room, she heard Philip's voice. "Is that an actual piano?" he asked, walking toward the corner where the old upright stood. "How lovely. Does anyone here play?" Sister Catherine froze, her hands tightening on the tea tray. The younger sisters shook their heads. Sister Claire said cheerfully, "Oh, that old thing is being donated next week. Nobody's played it in years." Philip ran his hand along the piano surface the same way Mother Beatrice had done days earlier, but with a different expression. Where Mother Beatrice had seen an outdated piece of furniture taking up space, Philip seemed to see something else. "What a shame," he said. "These old uprights have such character. I bet it has a beautiful sound." "It probably doesn't even work properly anymore," Sister Anne said. "It's ancient." Philip pressed one of the keys gently. A note rang out, slightly tinny but true. He smiled. "Still got life in it. You know, it would make a wonderful addition to the documentary. Music in religious communities, that sort of thing. Really brings the human element into focus." Mother Beatrice looked thoughtful. "Well, if any of us played, we'd be happy to include it. But I'm afraid we don't have any musicians among us." Sister Dorothy, who had been sitting quietly in the corner working on her embroidery, spoke up. Her voice was soft but clear. "Sister Catherine plays." Every head in the room turned toward Sister Catherine, who was still standing by the door with the tea tray, her face suddenly flushed. She shot Sister Dorothy a look that was part panic, part betrayal. Sister Dorothy just smiled gently and went back to her embroidery. "Sister Catherine?" Philip turned to her with interest. "You play piano?" Sister Catherine's mouth went dry. She could feel everyone's eyes on her. "A very long time ago. I don't anymore." "How long ago?" Joyce asked, her pen already poised over her clipboard, sensing a story. 60 years, Sister Catherine said quietly. "I haven't played in 60 years." A murmur went through the room. Even Mother Beatrice looked surprised. She had known Sister Catherine could play, but she hadn't realized the extent of it or how long it had been. 60 years, Philip repeated, clearly moved. "That's remarkable. Would you consider playing something for us? Just a short piece? It would be such a powerful moment for the documentary." Sister Catherine shook her head quickly. "No, I couldn't. I've forgotten everything. My hands are old. I wouldn't be able to." "Please," Philip said gently. "You don't have to play something complicated, even just a simple hymn. It would mean so much to include that in the film. The idea of rediscovering a gift after all these years, it's very moving." Sister Catherine looked desperately at Mother Beatrice, hoping she would intervene, would say no, would save her from this moment. But Mother Beatrice's expression had changed. She looked conflicted, perhaps realizing how harshly she had dismissed Sister Catherine's request to keep the piano. To refuse now in front of the cameras would make her look unkind. "Sister Catherine, if you're willing, I think it would be appropriate," Mother Beatrice said carefully. "Just a hymn, perhaps. Something in keeping with our life here." Sister Catherine felt trapped. Every fiber of her being wanted to refuse, to run from the room, to avoid this moment. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. 60 years. She hadn't played in 60 years. What if she had forgotten everything? What if her hands didn't work anymore? What if she embarrassed herself in the convent? But everyone was looking at her expectantly now. Even some of the younger sisters seemed curious, having never known this about her. Sister Margaret gave her an encouraging nod. Sister Dorothy was still smiling, that gentle smile. "I don't know if I can," Sister Catherine whispered. Philip walked over to her and spoke quietly, just for her to hear. "I understand you're nervous, but think of it this way, you're not performing. You're just sitting down at a piano, an old friend, and remembering something beautiful. If it doesn't work out, we won't use it. No pressure, no judgment, just you and the music." Something in his words, or perhaps in his kind tone, reached through Sister Catherine's fear. She set down the tea tray with trembling hands. Her legs felt weak as she walked toward the piano. It seemed like the longest walk of her life, with everyone watching. The cameras already being positioned, Joyce whispering instructions to the crew. Sister Catherine stood beside the piano bench for a moment, just looking at it. The wood was worn smooth where thousands of people over the decades had sat before. She slowly lowered herself onto it, her joints protesting slightly. The bench creaked, just as it had the other night when she'd sat here in the darkness. She looked down at the keys and her hands began to shake even more. They looked so old, these hands. Spotted with age, the skin thin and translucent, the veins prominent. These weren't the young, strong hands that had once won competitions. These were the hands of an 84-year-old woman who hadn't touched a piano in 6 decades. Tears began to well up in her eyes. She couldn't do this. It was too much, too hard, too frightening. She started to stand up, ready to apologize and leave. But then Sister Dorothy's words from the garden came back to her. Maybe our gifts are meant to be used, not buried. And she thought about all those years of silence, all those nights of wondering what if, all those moments of walking past this piano and feeling that hollow ache in her chest. Sister Catherine closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she lifted her hands and held them over the keys. They hovered there, trembling, suspended in time. The room had gone completely silent. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting. She thought about the first time she had ever touched a piano, 7 years old, and so excited she could barely contain herself. She thought about Mrs. Henderson, her first teacher who had believed in her. She thought about the competitions, the applause, the pure joy she had felt when everything aligned perfectly and the music just flowed. She thought about the choice she had made at 22, to leave all of that behind. She thought about 62 years of service, of prayer, of helping others. She thought about the person she had become and the person she had been. And then, very slowly, her fingers came down and touched the keys. The first notes were tentative, almost questioning. They hung in the air, fragile and uncertain. Sister Catherine's eyes were still closed, her face tense with concentration. Her fingers felt stiff, unfamiliar with the motion. For a terrible moment, she thought she really had forgotten everything, that 60 years had erased it all. But then something shifted. Her fingers found a chord, then another. Muscle memory, buried deep, began to wake up. The music was there, still inside her, waiting. It had always been there, patient and faithful, just like the piano itself. She began to play Amazing Grace, a hymn she had sung countless times in chapel, but hadn't played since before she took her vows. The notes came slowly at first, with some hesitation, some mistakes. Her fingers stumbled, trying to remember patterns they hadn't traced in 60 years. But gradually, the music began to flow more smoothly. As she played, tears began streaming down Sister Catherine's face. They dripped onto the keys, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. It was as if a dam had broken inside her, and everything she had held back for 6 decades was pouring out through her fingertips into those old, patient keys. The piano's sound wasn't perfect. Some notes were slightly out of tune, and it had that tinny quality that old uprights sometimes develop. But there was something else in the sound, too. Something that made everyone in the room go very still. It was emotion, raw and real and deeply human. Sister Catherine finished Amazing Grace and, without pausing, moved into another hymn. Her fingers were warming up now, remembering more and more. The stiffness was leaving them. The second hymn was played with more confidence, fewer mistakes. Then she played a third, and her hands were truly moving now, finding their way across the keyboard with increasing certainty. The cameras were rolling, capturing every moment. Joyce was crying, trying to wipe her tears quietly. Philip stood transfixed, knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Even Mother Beatrice had tears in her eyes. For a few moments after the hymns ended, Sister Catherine sat very still at the piano, her hands resting on the keys. She was breathing hard, her heart racing, feeling like she had just run a great distance. The tears were still wet on her cheeks. She had done it. She had actually done it. After 60 years of silence, she had played again, but something was stirring inside her now, something she hadn't anticipated. The hymns had been safe, familiar territory. They were appropriate for a nun in a convent, religious music that no one could question. But as her fingers rested on those keys, as the old muscle memory continued to wake up, she felt something else rising within her. The classical pieces. The music she had loved as a young woman. The competition pieces. The beautiful, complex compositions she had once played with such passion. Could she? After all these years, did she dare? Her fingers moved almost of their own accord. Without consciously deciding to, Sister Catherine began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was a piece she had played in her last competition before her father died, before everything changed. She had been 20 years old then, young and hopeful, believing the whole world was opening up before her. The moment the first notes sounded, different from the hymns, there was a collective intake of breath in the room. This was something else entirely. This was art, pure and transcendent. Sister Catherine's eyes were still closed, but now it wasn't from fear or concentration. She had gone somewhere else, somewhere beyond the common room, beyond the convent, beyond even herself. Her aged fingers danced across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible. The tentative quality from the hymns was gone. This was fluent, expressive, deeply felt. Yes, she made mistakes here and there. Her fingers couldn't move quite as quickly as they once had, and some of the more elaborate passages came out slightly simplified. But what she lacked in technical perfection, she made up for in emotion. The music swelled and receded like waves on a shore. It spoke of longing and loss, of beauty found and beauty remembered. It spoke of the passage of time, of choices made, of roads not taken. Every note carried the weight of 60 years of silence, of a gift buried but not destroyed, of a voice that had finally been allowed to speak again. Philip stood transfixed, one hand unconsciously covering his mouth. He had filmed hundreds of hours of footage over his career, but he had never seen anything like this. Joyce wasn't even trying to hide her tears anymore. The camera operators kept filming, not daring to move or make a sound. The sisters sat frozen, some with their hands clasped in prayer, others simply staring in wonder. Mother Beatrice felt a complex rush of emotions. Shame, certainly. How could she have dismissed this woman so easily? How could she have seen the piano as nothing more than an old piece of furniture taking up space? But there was also awe and a kind of grief for the beauty that had been hidden away all these years, and gratitude that she was here to witness its resurrection. Sister Catherine moved seamlessly from the Chopin into Bach's Prelude in C major. This was a piece that built slowly, each hand playing its own melody, the two interweaving in a way that created something greater than either could be alone. It was mathematical and spiritual at the same time, structured yet free, complex yet somehow simple. Bach would have approved of a nun playing his music. He had written so much of it for the glory of God, after all. As Sister Catherine played, something remarkable happened. The tension began to leave her body. Her shoulders, which had been hunched and tight, slowly relaxed. The furrow in her brow smoothed. A small smile, barely visible, touched her lips. She wasn't just playing the piano. She was coming home to a part of herself she had locked away for most of her life. The Bach built to its conclusion, the two melodic lines meeting and resolving in a way that felt both inevitable and miraculous. As the final notes faded, Sister Catherine didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The music was pouring out of her now like water from a broken dam, and she was helpless to hold it back. But what came next surprised even her. Her hands began to play something that wasn't Chopin or Bach, wasn't a hymn or a classical piece she had learned all those years ago. She was improvising, making it up as she went, and what emerged was something entirely her own. It was a fusion of everything she was, everything she had been, the classical training from her youth mixed with the hymns she had sung for 60 years. The technical precision of her early education merged with the spiritual depth of her life in the convent. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, sometimes joyful, sometimes melancholy, always honest. It rose and fell, spiraled and soared. It told a story without words, the story of a young girl who loved music, who lost her father, who found God, who made a choice to leave one life for another, who had served faithfully for 6 decades, who had buried a part of herself, and who was now in her 9th decade of life, finally allowing that buried part to breathe again. Sister Margaret was openly weeping. She had known Sister Catherine for 35 years and had never imagined the depths that her quiet friend contained. Sister Dorothy was smiling through her own tears, vindicated in her belief that gifts were meant to be used. Even the youngest sisters, like Sister Anne, who had dismissed the piano as an old relic, were visibly moved, seeing their elderly sister with entirely new eyes. The improvisation lasted perhaps 10 minutes, though time seemed to have stopped in that room. Sister Catherine played variations on her theme, developing it, exploring it, letting it evolve naturally under her hands. Sometimes it was quiet and contemplative, barely more than a whisper. Sometimes it swelled to fill the entire space with sound. Always it was utterly authentic, completely true to whatever Sister Catherine was feeling in that moment. When she finally reached the end, when her hands played the last chord and then lifted from the keys, there was a moment of absolute silence. No one moved. No one breathed. The room seemed to be holding that final note in the air, not wanting to let it go. Then the silence broke. Sister Margaret began to clap, and within seconds everyone joined in. The applause filled the common room, echoing off the stone walls. The documentary crew was clapping. The sisters were clapping. Mother Beatrice was clapping and crying at the same time. It was applause of the kind Sister Catherine hadn't heard since she was a young woman at her last competition. But it sounded different now. Richer somehow. More meaningful. Sister Catherine opened her eyes slowly, as if waking from a dream. She looked down at her hands, still on the piano keys, and seemed almost surprised to find them there. Then she looked around at all the faces staring at her, saw the tears, the smiles, the wonder, and she began to cry again. But these tears were different from the ones that had fallen while she played. These were tears of relief, of release, of joy. That was extraordinary, Philip said, his voice thick with emotion. Sister Catherine, that was one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed. How does it feel to play again after all these years? Sister Catherine had to try twice before she could speak. Her voice came out rough, broken. I didn't know, she said. I didn't know it was still there. I thought I had lost it. I thought it was gone forever. Did you want it to be gone? Joyce asked gently, her journalistic instincts kicking in even through her tears. Sister Catherine was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the question. I thought I did, she finally said. I thought letting it go was the right thing to do. I thought it was what God wanted from me. But now I wonder if maybe I was wrong. Maybe God gave me this gift not to bury it, but to use it. I just took 60 years to figure that out. Mother Beatrice stepped forward. Her face was streaked with tears, and she looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. Sister Catherine, I owe you an apology. When you asked to keep the piano, I dismissed you. I said you should focus on prayer instead of worldly things. I was wrong. This is prayer. What you just did, that was one of the most powerful prayers I've ever experienced. Sister Catherine looked up at her Mother Superior with surprise and gratitude. You don't have to apologize. You were right that I'm old, and that I should be focused on spiritual matters. But this is spiritual, Sister Dorothy said firmly, speaking up from her corner. Beauty is spiritual. Music is spiritual. The gifts God gives us are meant to be used, not hidden away. You've been a wonderful servant to this convent for 62 years, but you've also been denying a part of yourself that God created. Maybe it's time to stop denying it. Philip was still recording, capturing this entire conversation. He knew, with the instinct of someone who had been making documentaries for 20 years, that this was going to be something special. This wasn't just a story about a convent or charitable work anymore. This was a story about human potential, about gifts buried and rediscovered, about the courage it takes to be fully yourself even when it's easier to hide. Sister Catherine, he said, I know we came here today to film a documentary about religious communities and service, but what happened here is bigger than that. Would you be willing to let us tell your story? The whole story? About your past as a pianist, your choice to join the convent, the 60 years of silence, and now this moment? Sister Catherine looked uncertain. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. She had spent her entire adult life being part of a community, being one among many, never standing out or drawing focus to herself. The idea of her story being told, of people watching her, made her uncomfortable. But then she looked at the piano, this old, faithful friend that had waited so patiently all these years. She thought about other people who might have buried their own gifts, who might be living with that hollow ache, wondering if it was too late to reclaim who they truly were. Maybe her story could help them somehow. Maybe it could give them courage. Yes, she said quietly, you can tell it. The documentary aired 3 weeks later on a Tuesday evening. Philip had titled it The Sound of Grace. and he had woven Sister Catherine's story throughout the broader narrative about St. Anne's Convent and its charitable work. The footage of her playing the piano, tears streaming down her weathered face, hands moving across the keys with unexpected grace, formed the emotional heart of the film. Sister Catherine watched it in the common room with the other sisters. Sitting in the same spot where she had played that day, she felt nervous and exposed. Seeing herself on screen, hearing her voice in the interview segments Philip had filmed afterward. But as the documentary unfolded, she began to see what he had seen. It wasn't really about her at all, not in a self-centered way. It was about something bigger, about human resilience, about gifts that survive even when we try to bury them, about it never being too late to reclaim parts of ourselves we thought were lost forever. What none of them expected was what happened next. By the following morning, clips of Sister Catherine playing had been shared across social media platforms. People were posting the video, commenting, sharing their own stories of abandoned dreams and buried talents. The views climbed rapidly. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. By that evening, the documentary had been watched over 1 million times. The convent's phone began ringing constantly. News organizations wanted interviews. Music magazines wanted to write features. People from around the world were sending emails, letters, messages through every possible channel. They wanted to hear more from Sister Catherine. They wanted to know her story in greater detail. They wanted to thank her for inspiring them. Mother Beatrice was overwhelmed trying to manage the response. She had never imagined anything like this. The story kept growing. Major news networks picked it up. Newspapers ran articles. Sister Catherine's face appeared on morning talk shows, with hosts discussing her story even though she hadn't agreed to appear herself. Within a week, invitations started arriving. Concert halls wanted her to perform. Universities wanted to give her honorary degrees. Music festivals offered to feature her as a special guest. A recording company wanted to produce an album. The offers came from London, Paris, Vienna, New York, from small community centers and prestigious auditoriums alike. Sister Catherine sat in Mother Beatrice's office, looking at the pile of invitations spread across the desk, feeling completely out of her depth. "I don't understand," she kept saying. "I just played a piano. Why do all these people care?" Mother Beatrice, who had been doing a lot of thinking over the past week, said gently, "Because you gave them hope. You showed them that it's never too late. That the things we love never truly leave us even if we think they're gone. That gifts can survive decades of silence and still bloom when given the chance. People need that message, Sister Catherine. They need it desperately. But I'm not a performer anymore," Sister Catherine protested. "I'm 84 years old. I'm a nun. I can't just go traveling around doing concerts. That's not who I am." "Isn't it, though?" Sister Dorothy asked. She had been invited to join the conversation, given her role in encouraging Sister Catherine. "You're a nun, yes, but you're also a pianist. You're both things. You've always been both things. Maybe it's time to stop choosing between them and accept that you can be all of who you are." Sister Catherine looked down at her hands, those aged hands that had rediscovered their purpose. "What if I fail? What if I get in front of all those people and forget everything? What if my hands freeze up? What if I embarrass everyone?" "Then you'll be human," Mother Beatrice said simply, "and that will be fine." "But Sister Catherine, I don't think that's what will happen. I watched you play that day. Once you let yourself actually play, it was like watching someone come alive. I think you need to do this. Not for fame or recognition, but for yourself, and maybe for God. Maybe this is what He's been waiting for all along." The discussions continued over the next several days. The sisters held special meetings to talk about what Sister Catherine should do. Some of the younger sisters thought she should accept everything, do all the concerts, become famous. Others thought she should refuse all of it and return to her quiet life. The older sisters were more nuanced in their thinking, recognizing that this was a profound spiritual and personal question that Sister Catherine needed to answer for herself. In the end, Sister Catherine made a decision that felt right to her. She would accept one invitation, just one, a charity concert being organized by a music foundation that raised money for homeless shelters in 3 cities. The concert would be held in a mid-sized auditorium, nothing too grand or overwhelming. All the proceeds would go directly to helping people in need. It felt like a way to use her gift for service, to align both parts of herself, the pianist and the nun, toward the same purpose. The news of her decision made headlines. The charity concert sold out within hours. People who couldn't get tickets asked if it would be recorded. The Music Foundation, overwhelmed by the response, decided to live stream the event so that anyone who wanted to watch could do so. The weeks leading up to the concert were both exhilarating and terrifying for Sister Catherine. She practiced every day, her fingers growing stronger and more confident. The piano had been professionally tuned and its sound was richer now, more resonant. Sister Margaret would sit and listen while she practiced, knitting quietly in the corner. Sister Dorothy would sometimes join her, reading a book, just keeping her company. The other sisters adapted to the new reality too. The common room had become a sort of informal concert hall, with sisters dropping by to listen when Sister Catherine practiced. Even Sister Anne, who had been so dismissive of the piano, found herself drawn to the music. She apologized to Sister Catherine one afternoon, admitting that she had been wrong to call the piano a relic, wrong to think that old things had no value. Mother Beatrice decided the piano would stay exactly where it was. In fact, she canceled the common room renovation entirely. The room was perfect as it was, she declared. The piano was its heart and it would remain so. The day of the concert arrived. Sister Catherine rode to the auditorium in a van with Mother Beatrice, Sister Margaret, Sister Dorothy, and several other sisters who had insisted on coming to support her. She wore her simple nun's habit as she always did. Some people had suggested she wear a concert dress, something more formal, but Sister Catherine had refused. This was who she was. She wouldn't pretend to be anyone else. Backstage, waiting to go on, Sister Catherine felt the same fear she had felt sitting at the piano in the common room that day. Her hands shook. Her heart raced. She looked at Mother Beatrice with panic in her eyes. "I can't do this," she whispered. Mother Beatrice took her hands, holding them firmly. "Yes, you can. But Sister Catherine, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Not to the audience, not to the people watching online, not to me, not even to God. You've already proven everything that matters. If you go out there and play, wonderful. If you go out there and can't play, that's fine too. Either way, you're brave and you're loved and you're exactly where you're meant to be." Those words steadied her. Sister Catherine took a deep breath, then another. The stage manager came to tell her it was time. She walked out onto the stage, the lights bright in her eyes, the audience stretching back into darkness, hundreds of people in the auditorium, thousands more watching online. She could have been terrified. But instead, as she walked to the piano that waited for her on stage, she felt something else. Peace. She sat down at the bench. She looked at the keys, and suddenly it wasn't about the audience at all. It was just her and the piano, the way it had always been, the way it was meant to be. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. She started with the hymn Amazing Grace, the same piece she had played that day in the common room. It felt right to begin there, to honor where this journey had started. The notes filled the auditorium clear and pure. Then she moved into the Chopin Nocturne, and then the Bach Prelude, playing the same pieces in the same order, recreating that sacred moment when she had rediscovered her gift. But then, just as she had done before, she began to improvise. And this improvisation was different from the first one. It was less about grief and rediscovery and more about joy and gratitude. It celebrated the journey, the unexpected turns, the ways life surprises us. It honored the 60 years of service while also celebrating the reclamation of a gift. It was a prayer in musical form, thanking God for the long road that had led her to this moment. When she finished, the audience sat in stunned silence for several heartbeats. Then they rose to their feet as one, applauding,